Major breaking news out of WWE today as nearly 10 WWE superstars have been released, including some very high profile names. We're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about one of these names who apparently looks like they are headed to All Elite Wrestling already. At least that's the way the winds are turning. There's so much to get into, so much to talk about. We're going to talk about who these talent are, what may have led up to these releases, and what we can expect next for each of them. Before we get started, be sure to smash that thumbs up, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I'm obviously not in my normal studio. This is an emergency setup, so apologies for the visuals. Apologies if the mic is very low, but we're going to make do with what we have as we go through these insane names that are on this list. Former WWE Women's Tag Team Champion Isla Dawn, Sonya Deville, no longer with WWE. You also have the likes of stars like Doc Gallows, Carl Anderson, who, by the way, is still dealing with an injury released today by WWE. Blair Davenport, someone who had a lot of hype around her in WWE, released. Giovanni Vinci, another big name we're going to talk about later on in this video, and Cedric Alexander, who actually was released last night, and some just major shakeups here. Of course, the last people that I wanted to highlight here were Paul Ellering, Akam, and Razor, the authors of Pain, the last names on this list that we're going to talk about. So let's begin by talking about Sonya Deville, who actually was a talent on this list who was not released. Instead, the distinction for her is that she is going to have her WWE contract elapse. And unlike some of these other talents, she's not going to deal with a 90-day non-compete whenever her contract term ends. We don't know exactly when that date is, but it is expected to be soon, as it was announced and kind of leaked out to the media that she was basically done with the company effectively. And it's a major development. Obviously, Sonya Deville has been a pretty much a staple in WWE for the last couple of years. You may remember that big clip of her like going that went viral a couple of years ago, nearly 10 years ago at this point, where she was having her WWE tryout, and she came out like right there in front of Paul Levesque and the entire NXT team, and it was like a major moment. And it kind of, in some very positive ways, like defined her as someone who was going to be unafraid of whatever criticism may come of her, with that whole stuff. And you know I think one thing is true for Sonya is, in everything she did, she gave it her all, right? In WWE, like, she was able to get to a point where that story between herself and Mandy Rose a couple of years ago had a lot of heat. It was one of the few things during the pandemic era of WWE that was really, really good. And, you know, obviously some horrific things got in the way of that being, really, really, capitalized on. But regardless, Sonya Deville later on went on to become like the general manager of WWE Raw and SmackDown with Adam Pearce, and she was a very good talker. And that talking has kind of gotten her to where she is as character in WWE throughout her time. Like, no matter what, she's always doing something on the show, and that's why I think no matter where she ends up going, she's going to get some eyeballs on her. She's definitely going to get an opportunity here. And I think in TNA, AEW, wherever she ends up going, she'll definitely have that. So Sonya Deville, contract elapsed, not released, unlike basically everyone else on this list. Let's next talk about Doc Gallows, Carl Anderson, the Good Brothers, as they're known or were known in WWE, both released by the company. This is the one that sticks in my crawl a little bit more than the others. Obviously, you hate to see anyone lose their jobs, but the thing with Carl Anderson that, is very upsetting is he is currently rehabbing an injury. FightfulSelect.com, I believe, had reported today that he was still looking at a recovery time of between 3 to 6 months, and he was released while injured. Now, we don't know the context. I want to be clear. We don't know whether he asked for it. I Some of the reporting that I read, it did not seem as if he asked for it. Of course, that's my own interpretation. It did not go right to that. if you were a company, and if WWE did this, if you were a company that releases a talent, regardless of the situation, while they are injured, you're scummy. That's a scummy ass move. That's a punk ass move. That ain't just bad for business. It's bad for PR. It's bad for everything. And most of all, it's bad for the talent. It's setting a horrible precedent. It's just like when Tony Khan, a couple of, I think last year, he got a lot of flack. He got a lot of flack for releasing an injured talent. He got a lot of flack for it. So much so that he ended up signing that talent back to a contract. And I think we got to treat this situation with the exact same energy because it deserves it. If Carl Anderson did not ask for his release and WWE just did it because budget cuts, pal, that's a horrible thing to do. It's a horrible thing to do. And look, the Good Brothers, they're gonna get an opportunity whenever Carl Anderson is ready to go. On principle, though, releasing a talent when they're injured is something I don't agree. Now, looking forward for these guys, I think there's definitely going to be opportunities here for them to go into either AEW, New Japan. I think their lineage with the Bullet Club definitely lends itself to something like that. We saw a couple of years ago when they were free agents. They wound up signing with TNA. They were doing stuff in New Japan, and there was crossover between themselves, Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks. Look for that to happen once again as they go off and do their thing outside of WWE. And I think they have a lot of experience, they have a lot of history, and they have a lot of potential for future storytelling elsewhere. Shout out to them. Shout out to Carl Anderson. Hopefully you get well soon, good brother. Another person we got to talk about is Blair Davenport. One of the more shocking releases in this batch for sure. Blair Davenport, someone who had a ton of potential, a ton of talent, who was just seemingly let go from her WWE contract before ever really realizing it. And the thing with her is, she kind of came as part of like I forgot the exact name of it, but it was like some international tournament that WWE had done, and she had like really made an impact there. And unfortunately, she just never got, I think, enough exposure or time really to show everyone what she was capable of in WWE. And sometimes it really is like down to that. And as bad as it sounds, if you don't if people don't know who you are and what you're about, and you're not given like that much exposure, then obviously people aren't going to be clamoring for you to be on TV. And that's where like this whole idea of like WWE, I think like having all this TV time, having all this talent, right, and then not using them. It's a criticism you can say about multiple wrestling companies, AEW included. But right now, WWE between Raw and SmackDown have nearly 6 hours of weekly TV. NXT add another two. You got Evolve coming up. You have WWE Speed. You have what's the other one? LFG. You got a lot of talent. You got a lot of time to fill. Yet we're still seeing people put on the shelf for one reason or another. You're still seeing people not being used. You're still seeing people not being given an opportunity when there is plenty of potential in order to give that opportunity. Is what it is. Shout out to Blair Davenport. I definitely think she's a name to keep an eye on. Definitely a name to keep an eye on as far as kind of finding out what was behind this release is Giovanni Vinci. Now, this is one of the more peculiar kind of situations. Giovanni Vinci, you guys will remember a couple of months ago, after he had been essentially kicked out of Imperium and Imperium had broken up, we saw him go off and have these series of vignettes that were I don't know, essentially touting him as like this like next big thing kind of supermodel like wrestler. Like I don't know, like it was giving big like Rob Conway ECW vibes. Or no, not ECW. Oh, Sylvain Grenier ECW vibes. We can totally say that. um But like Rob Conway, just look at me, vibes. Anyway, but he had these series of vignettes that people were excited for, that were getting a lot of buzz, a lot of TV time, and then he shows up, he gets jobbed out to Apollo Crews, and he's like never heard from again outside of like a couple of very brief appearances, and it's been a question. It's like where's Waldo? Where's Giovanni? Where is he? We don't know. So Giovanni Vinci kind of disappeared from the map. There's some like backstage like, rumor and speculation that I won't get too much into here, but it's like another situation where it's like they basically brought him up to do nothing with him, and my only question is from a business standpoint, because like look, there's plenty of things you could say about this situation as a wrestling fan. From a business standpoint, you spent you probably spent a couple $1,000 minimum. I know how much like video production works, and like how like manpower hours, all that kind of stuff. You spent a couple grand probably producing these vignettes, and he had more time in these vignettes than he's had in the ring basically. What's your return on investment here? Like what are we doing? What are we doing? What did this do? Right? And maybe it's a situation where they just gave up immediately. But then if you're gonna do those promos, just don't have him appear. Like if you like okay, you do the promos and you're like, well, maybe we don't want to do this anymore. All right, just be like, okay, have him get attacked backstage and be done with it. Don't build up this big match as if it's a big thing and then have it, blow up in his face. I don't know. Another name that we got to talk about and who could be headed to AEW is Cedric Alexander. So Cedric Alexander was released. He actually had stated on X, if we could take a look at this, uh, this is the Fightful Select report. He actually had like tweeted this out on X, where he said, "Thank you for the last 8.5 years. Being a professional wrestler has been a dream of mine uh, since I could from memories. A dream of mine since I could form memories. There we go. I can barely read. This is a very tiny screen that I'm used to, guys. From form memories, and I will continue to do so till to do so till the good Lord says otherwise. As I flubbed my way through that again, emergency video, as you guys can tell. Um, but, obviously he had stated that, and then the news trickled out that he was, in fact, released from WWE. Cedric Alexander, former 205 Live star, former Cruiserweight champion, and one member of the Hurt Business, now the Hurt Syndicate in AEW. Okay, he's been there for 8.5 years. Maybe it was time for him to leave the territory, and then WWE pushed him out. And then we get this little nugget from the courtesy of FightfulSelect.com. AEW sources expected several within the Hurt Syndicate to push for Cedric Alexander in the company. So I would not be surprised if this ended up materializing. Obviously, Cedric Alexander has a 90-day non-compete, so bare minimum, it would not happen at least for another 3 months. And I do, though, think that he is the most likely person to end up in AEW as soon as his contract is up. I think there's definitely a spot for him there, and it will just literally add to that group. And I still think that group and MVP should be out there recruiting more and more talent, and they should get a few women stars in there. They should get another like young guy in there to really build up. And I think Cedric Alexander, he's able to tell stories in the ring. He's able to add to the aura of the group, the history of the group. It's a good fit, in my opinion. So, moving on, we also got to talk about Paul Ellering and the Authors of Pain. I mean, not much to talk about. Shout out to AOP. But I mean, other than the crypto stuff and the bogus wrestling show they tried to put on. Anyway, all right, all right. Look, wrestling. Authors of Pain have, you know, really we've seen their use minimized over the last couple of months. They were running with Paul Ellering ever since NXT, and the whole deal there was they were always going to be a package deal. Like AOP always wanted Paul Ellering to be there. Paul Ellering, of course, WWE Hall of Famer. He was the manager of the Road Warriors, and I always thought in NXT they were really good. They were really good together. It was a good pairing, and it made a lot of sense. But on the main roster, the way they were presented, the way they were booked, it just never really got off the ground in the right way. I hated, absolutely despised, hated the stuff that they did with Karrion Kross in this recent run. And I just don't think that there's a position for them there, and that's why they're out. Doesn't make it right. Doesn't That's not justifying it. That's just the reasoning there. Um, and the rumor and innuendo, for whatever it's worth, also they were not really well liked by some people in the wrestling industry. So, and again, it goes back to some of the controversies of the past. So, all that aside, they're now gone from WWE, as is Isla Dawn. This one is, I would say probably the biggest shocker in my view. Just by virtue, I mean, her and Sonya Deville are probably the two biggest shockers in my view. Just by virtue that Isla Dawn was a champion, a women's tag team champion, just a couple about like 6 months ago. That remember herself and Alba Fire had a major moment over there in Scotland at Clash at the Castle, and it was, I thought, to maybe build them up, to prop them up for something bigger. And she has always been very consistent, I think, in the ring. She has always, had a mystique and aura about her. She also responded, I should say, to her WWE release on Twitter with on Instagram, I should say, with the following post on her stories. Here for a good time, not a long time. See you in 90. So, Isla Dawn, seemingly in positive spirits. This is another puzzling one. Again, she was a champion like 6 months ago. What happened? I believe that herself and Alba Fire, if I'm not mistaken, were the first ever NXT and WWE Women's Tag Team Champions at the same time. Maybe there was one more. Maybe, maybe. But regardless, this one's really puzzling just by virtue of like them building her up recently. And I think she's someone who will land somewhere else. I think that AEW would be a good place for her. I think TNA would probably be better. One of the things we've talked about with AEW is like they also have a pretty bloated roster, so you can't just be signing everyone up. I think there's something to the strategy of okay, have someone, okay, keep an eye on someone, be in contact with them, and then see if they're able to get a lot of hype somewhere else. I think that's probably a smarter strategy for even TNA, honestly, and AEW and other companies, and WWE for that matter, for AEW talent who are released. I think that's a really smart way of kind of going about it. And I think Isla Dawn is someone who is definitely going to take advantage fully of any opportunity she's given, if she's ever given it. As we saw in WWE, it was very seldom across the board for a lot of these talent, especially. But she's definitely got a lot ahead of her. Shout out to her. These are all of the releases and contract expirations that we know about as of this recording. If there are more, I will try to probably give an update tomorrow, unless something insane happens. We'll try to regroup and be back tomorrow, hopefully in the regular studio again. Apologies for this. This is not my regular setup, as you guys know. But for all your daily wrestling content, news, notes, updates, live streams, be sure to leave a thumbs up, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and let me know in the comment section what you guys think about these releases. Until next time, I'm Omer Q for Real Take Wrestling. Be happy, be healthy, and as always, keep it real.